And we're back with another episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series, but this one is all about another collaborative spotlight. So last week I covered the FlameTongue collab, and now I'm going to cover the second part of that collab, which is the Mistika collab. So, very exciting, all very good. We've got another lot of absolutely awesome looking stuff here. Of course, normally your Bionicle Inspiration series comes out on Saturdays, and today will not be Saturday. At least at the time of this recording, in my time zone in the world, all that jazz. But next Saturday we'll continue with our regular scheduled programming of the Bionicle Inspiration series being on Saturdays. But that's enough housekeeping. Before we begin, let's dive on into some really fantastic mocks inspired by the Mistika wave of Bionicle Lego sets. So these are essentially revamps of those sets, and that's what we're going to talk about today. If you want to revamp these characters, or you just kind of want to look at some cool techniques and learn a few things, or you just want to look at cool mocks and not really think about how to build them, you can do all of that today. Alright, so this first mock is by Buttloaf Builds, and this is Gali. So before we start, all the mocks that you see in today's episode are edited by the Buttloaf Builds himself. Great man he is. He's done some fantastic job with these edits. Like, as somebody who does a lot of editing and things on Photoshop, he's done a phenomenal job. So credit where credit is due, and applause where applause is due, because you did well, good sir. And I know you're under a lot of stress editing all that sort of stuff, so well done, because it looks schmick. But anyway, Gali. So you've also done a fantastic job building Gali. One thing I really like is the kind of very different approach you've taken to the aesthetic that she has. So this is a slight departure from the original set that this is obviously based off of, but you've kind of given it this cool sort of almost kind of ragtag kind of hunter look. Almost sort of post-apocalyptic to some degree. I love the idea that she has a bit more sort of spindly kind of put together armor. She's also got this cool sort of tattered cloak that, I don't know, she just found or something, and she's put it on to keep warm or just to look cool. It does have, yeah, like I said, that kind of post-apocalyptic kind of vibe or feeling to it, which I think is just very fitting and very cool. And I think that's a really unique way of approaching the idea of the Mistika, because the idea is, you know, they get their different armor and they look all cool now, and they're going into these sort of evil, murky swamps where the Makuta reign, and, you know, it's filled with all sorts of secrets and evil things and bad stuff, you know? So kind of like the idea that, you know, these swamps are almost like some sort of apocalyptic world, and the sort of style of armor that she might have can kind of reflect that. It's a little bit more sort of thrown together, a bit more ragtag, but it's helpful for the situation that she's in. So again, this is just the way that I look at this. This may not be the aesthetic you were aiming for, but that's certainly what I see, and I think that's really cool and certainly unique as well. And I think that's a great way of approaching any revamp of a Bionicle wave, is to really look into the world that the characters were in and see how that might affect the aesthetic of the character, or just a unique way that you could reimagine or approach it. Certainly a lot of that was done with the FlameTongue collab that we just covered last episode, and I think that's definitely being done really well and in a really unique way that Buttloaf is doing here. I also love how the armor is layered on the lower leg of this Gali revamp here, just the way that Star Wars Ultra Build shin piece really nicely flows into the foot there. I don't know, there's just a really nice transition of those two armor pieces, and if you're ever able to find that, you're just kind of playing with your CCBS armor or just any other kind of Bionicle pieces, and you can find really nice transitions like that. I just think it's 9 times out of 10 is always just going to really help your mock look even cooler, because it's just nice. It's just nice to see pieces flowing so beautifully one into the other like that. I think that's just a good little staple of a well-designed mock, at least in my opinion there. I also love, too, this big, massive gun that Gali is carrying here. It's always cool to see just big old guns on characters. It's always just a nice little trope. But I love some of the little details on it, like the inclusion of this sort of lime barrel, you know, whatever sort of armor that might, or ammo, sorry, armor, whatever sort of ammo that might be on the gun. It could even be kind of green. It could be some sort of swamp water that she's managed to weaponize or something. That could be cool. I don't know if it is that, but I like the idea. But I really, really love, and ironically, I've not seen it that much, the inclusion of one of those rope pieces and then sort of channeling that forward into a sort of harpoon. So this also doubles as a sort of harpoon gun, as maybe a way to traverse the swamps, or, you know, travel in awkward places, or just she uses a harpoon as a weapon because, hey, she's a tower of water. Kind of makes sense to some degree. I think that's a really unique way of approaching a weapon, and is pretty simple because you're just attaching a string and that harpoony kind of piece at the end there. It looks cool. It looks really cool. So some really unique stuff going on here and a great way of approaching and reimagining the theme. Okay, let's move on to Tahu, and this Tahu mock is by BD. One of my favorite things about just waves of Bionicle sets was I always kind of gravitated towards kind of like the leader-looking characters. Like, whether or not they were the actual leader of the group is a different story, but like Motoro from the Tora Naika I always felt had these really strong, like noble leader-like looking qualities. I felt Vakama had as well. Tahu definitely did. And those, as a kid, were always some of my favorite Bionicle toys. And so what I love about this revamp of Tahu is it's kind of really captured that look. There's something about this sort of knight-like aesthetic that he's got that looks very noble, very leader-like, very kind of proud, Captain America almost. And I really like that. I think that's just such a... To me, it's so ingrained in the DNA of Bionicle, so I love seeing BD really, really effectively put that in this version of Tahu here, because... yeah, like I said, Tahu was one of those characters, and is even still to this day one of those characters that had this beautiful leader-like look to him. And I especially think, too, the Mistika version really did have elements of that look in it. Obviously, the Mistika versions were decently strong departures from the original look of the Toamata, but I think that specifically Tahu had a lot of kind of silver on him. He even had a shield, and he, to me, did seem very knight-like. So I like that he's leaned into that aesthetic, and he's done so in some really awesome ways here. So specifically, he's used a lot of the Star Wars Ultra Build Shin armor pieces in silver. I believe they came in silver on Captain Phasma. If they came in any other sets, they are escaping my mind right now, but I'm definitely pretty sure Captain Phasma came with some of those. No, those naturally do have that sort of very smooth armor-like look to them, and the way that he's put them on the arms and the legs here does look a lot like kind of knight armor. And then also using the Nuva chest piece there, again, does kind of look like knight armor. And also cool as well, that's the Takanuva chest piece there, and, you know, obviously they were once Takanuva, the Tahu and all the other guys there, so a nice little bit of consistency there. But yeah, really, really effectively using the silver armor pieces on this to look like armor pieces. And the way that silver Nuva chest piece kind of slightly juts out does make him look sort of more broad-shouldered, bold, and heroic. Very, very brave-looking knight aesthetic that he's got going on here. So I think it's very fitting and just a great way of reapproaching this toy, because I feel like the original toy for Tahu Mistika was kind of leaning into that aesthetic, but I don't know how effectively it conveyed that. Again, this could all be my perspective. You may not have seen that in Tahu Mistika, but personally, I think that really, really works here on this revamp. And additionally, I think what also works so well is the fact that he very strongly looks like a leader. And obviously, this is this really beautiful collab of reimagining the whole team. And I don't know, I get this really nice sort of mental image of the team together and Tahu standing at the front, leading them in battle. And I feel like, yeah, he'd look good as a leader standing in battle, you know? He'd look brave, he'd look strong, he'd look mighty. It's good. It's good. So it's amazing how far little inclusions of armor can really go to bring out the beautiful qualities of a character. Speaking of bringing out cool stuff, I love the gun design on Tahu here. I love that it has this little blue flame piece sticking out the front there, the idea that his gun is a bit of a flamethrower, which really fits in with the theme of Tahu being a tower of fire, of course. I also think, in terms of it fitting in with the theme, the fact that they are exploring a swamp in the depths of Kradanui Swamp there, and it was Kradanui, right? Oh, my Bionicle lore, guys. It's this early morning as I record this. Who knows? I'm pretty darn sure it is. I could check the Google machine. I'll go check the Google machine. And Google doesn't let me down. It is Kradanui. But I like the idea that as you're exploring the swamp, you're going to come up against, foliage and plants and all sorts of craziness. And you might need a flamethrower or two to just burn some of that out of the way and help you to traverse the swamp without facing any dangers. I think that's, again, another really fitting inclusion on this revamp of Tahu that really fits in with the world that he's a part of. I think that's awesome. And that's really awesome. It's a really nice little slight detail that is really ingrained in the concept of this character. It's just awesome. I love too that Tahu's weapon has this disc launcher piece that came on some Exoforce sets. It's got no discs in it, it's just the launcher piece itself. But I don't know, it kind of looks like this really awesome ammo stock, or maybe flamethrower canister or something like that. I don't know, it's just a fun little detail and a really nice use of that part, in my opinion there. So yeah, a beautiful reimagining of Tahu. And Let's move into another beautiful reimagining of another Toa, and this is Onua. And this Onua revamp here has been built by the one and only Space Glove. So I love how he's completely reimagined this Onua mask here. It's not, I don't know, it's not even really that close to the Mistika Onua mask, and it's not even necessarily overly close to any of Onua's other kind of versions of his mask, at least in my opinion there. But still, I think it's a beautiful reimagining of the mask. Kind of just the way those rubber bands form this sort of longer green eye really pops, and I think the mask is almost sort of reminiscent of Wenua Hordika's headpiece, at least in my opinion. I think it is. And so I kind of like that there is that sort of subtle callback to other Toa of Earth there. I don't know, I think it's just fitting. And, you know, that was something that the Mistika did, is completely reimagine those masks with little subtle nods to the original, but also being quite different. So it's nice that he's done that in his own unique way and not used the actual mask and just done it his way, you know? It's really cool. I love, too, the changes to Onua's shield and his gun here as well, because, of course, the Mistika versions had both of those things. I think these designs look fantastic, using some of those larger kind of wing fin pieces and angling them in a fashion there with a dish at the bottom to really look like this sort of more really impressive sort of heroic-like shield. And then this gun here that, I don't know, look, I'm not a big expert on guns, but it just looks cool. And hey, sometimes cool factor is all you need. The gun doesn't need to be practical, the weapons don't need to be practical, but it's the rule of cool. If it looks nice, that's all that matters, you know? I love, too, that this version of Onua kind of has some tubing going on, and he's got these awesome almost sort of jet things kind of poking out his back with that little bit of orange that really pops here up against the rest of the color scheme. But going back to those tubes, I really kind of like the idea that this version of Onua is really more effectively leaning into the idea of Onua having a very specific suit for this specific environment. Like, he's got these tubes, he's got very specific weapons, and this more sort of slim, agile-looking frame and sort of silhouette and design to his body. And it's probably, you know, all been specifically designed to cater for the environment that he'll be exploring in. You know, I'm going back to that same concept. How can the environment that your character lives in really affect the way that it's built? You know, I think that's really something that if you think long and hard about it, can really seriously help you as you're building. And it's always good to have a little bit of extra food for thought. For example, I'm building a Lego diorama at the moment. It's a Star Wars little diorama, sort of an Imperial base that I'm making. I am building it just because I enjoy building it, but I'm also building it with the intent of using it as a map for a sort of tabletop roleplay game that I want to play with my friends. And what's been really fun as I'm building it is factoring in how the specific things I'm making will factor into the story I want to tell in that roleplay game, and how the characters are going to be able to, you know, like storm the base and, you know, take down the guns or do whatever. And it's been this really awesome experience to just really think it through as if I was a part of this world and really imagining what characters are inhabiting it, how people will interact with it. And it's honestly been such an awesome experience because I've made so many design choices as I've been building that have had a larger, deeper purpose, or I've discovered beautiful things as I've built and gone, hey, actually, that's going to really factor into the story. And it's really brought this mock to life and given it this sort of rich kind of backstory and character almost. You know, for example, I was going to add some sort of like, I don't know, Star Wars space detail-y, greebly things. And then I was like, well, why don't I add like a little sort of machine turret here that can defend the base because people are going to be attacking it. That seems fitting. And then I made this really awesome turret out of it. And I was like, hey, that's really cool. And, you know, obviously this is a bit of a different scenario because it's a sort of brick-built, you know, diorama, whereas you're building a more, you know, humanoid character. But the same kind of principles can be applied. Can you make decisions that are based on the environment it lives in? And how can that really just make the mock more rich and filled with story, life, character? And you can just kind of come up with things you may not have thought of before as well. You know, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. So there you go. I think that's a fantastic version of Onua, and I think it's rich with a lot of the concepts we've been exploring in this episode. So that's super cool. Up next, we have Gorast by _double. So this uses some of the wing pieces that came on the Avengers Ant-Man set from the very first Ant-Man movie. Now, these pieces are awesome. I've always really enjoyed them. They're that sort of interesting kind of plastic, and I know all Lego's made out of plastic, but that sort of plastic material that you can see on a lot of sort of cape elements or other kind of more unique Lego elements that come on a sort of larger kind of plastic sheet and you kind of pop them out and stuff. That's what these wing elements are. They're a bit more of a unique piece, but There's so many great uses that I've seen for them in the LEGO community, you know. Often they can revolve around, bug-like creatures like this, but I've seen them used on fairies and all sorts of other cool things. So honestly, they're just a really versatile, helpful piece, and it's great to see it being used here on Gorast, which was a character that did have some really snazzy wings as the set. So yeah, just beautiful to see that reimagined with just what was a really cool piece, and I think a piece that you yourself would easily be able to use on any mock that you might be building. But yeah, it fits so well with the overall aesthetic here. I love all the different hands that Gorast has here. The idea of them being a little bit more sort of spiddly towards the ends and having those minifigure hand pieces attached to them really kind of makes them feel more bug-like, more insect-like, with the little almost sort of hairs kind of poking out, whatever that is specifically on a bug. I'm not a bug expert, I can't give you the official names for that sort of thing, but it does look very bug-like, which is certainly what Gorast and some of the other Makuta will be talking about. They very much leaned into that aesthetic. So I think that's just a beautiful little addition, and it's slightly different from how the original set looked, but again, really leaning into some of the inspirations of the original toy and expanding on them in some fashion. So that's a great way of approaching the mindset that you might want to come into as you're building one of these characters. Additionally, too, I love how he's redesigned the claws on each of the individual hands here. Just really nice looking claw designs. And specifically, I love that he's done what the set did. One hand design is the same color as the rest of the mock, and then the other pair of hands was that sort of silver. And it's funny, I never kind of registered that until I saw this mock, and I was like, yeah, right, Gorast kind of had silver claws for one of their hand pieces there. But I kind of almost like seeing it in this context, where it almost looks like they're kind of robotic claws. And I'm like, that's awesome, but weird, you know? Like, what, did Gorast just, like, lose their arms or lose their hands, rather, and needed to replace them with robotic ones? I'm like, what is that? That's cool. But I also kind of like the idea of kind of playing it with concepts of like General Grievous or Darth Vader or something, where they find ways of kind of reinterpreting their bodies or enhancing them with mechanical details to make themselves stronger or more menacing, you know? And I kind of like that, you know? It's like I spoke about in the last episode, the idea of having kind of limb designs or things that are unnaturally shaped or proportioned, because evil things being unnatural is an aesthetic you see quite often, and it's something that works really well when you do it. And I kind of like that idea, you know? What sort of evil character or Makuta character can you make? How can you make them have some sort of unnatural element on them? And the unnatural element could be exactly that, weird mechanical hands. Who knows, you know? It's a slight little detail, slight little thing, but it works well. Final thing I love about this Gorast revamp is all the different uses of the CCBS armor pieces kind of on the main sort of body of this mock here. Really does have that beautiful kind of bug-like textured aesthetic to it. And it's just awesome seeing all those different CCBS armor pieces used in that manner to really effectively kind of draw out this very strong bug aesthetic here. It's just interesting to see those pieces being used in that manner to create that kind of aesthetic and texture. It's just cool. It's really cool. And yeah, this is a fantastic way of reimagining Gorast, one of my favorite Makuta. Really good job. Let's move on to Bitil, and Bitil was built by Lemonade. So I like this quite different take for Bitil, him having 4 legs now and being this sort of different bug-like kind of design. And I love that because, you know, like I said, all these Makuta were a little bit more sort of inspired by bugs of some sort. So I like the idea of when you're reimagining the character, how different can you be from the original, but still taking notes from what was there before. So instead of him being this 2-legged bug, he can be a 4-legged bug with almost sort of like praying mantis claw hand things. And yeah, you can just really go ham on making him look drastically different from how he was before. But still honoring what was there originally, which I love. I really love. I love, too, that taking a look at sort of the bottom of his 4 legs, we can see even more of those minifigure hand pieces. And I think that's such a great thing to do when you are doing a collab with a bunch of different people, is paying attention to some of the techniques that they have used in their mocks, and seeing if you can use similar techniques in what you've done. Because, you know, you take a look at a whole wave of Bionicle sets. There are very consistent things used across all the different toys. You know, they all have similar blasters or a similar sort of design style to the way their mask is made, or a sort of shared color scheme or something like that. I like the idea of you doing that yourself, just seeing the little techniques that other people have done, just so that all the mocks across this whole collab have this nice sense of consistency. They all look like one part of a larger, bigger thing. And it's as simple as doing that, just reaching out to the people you're building with and saying, hey, can you send me some pictures of what you're making? Studying what they've done and seeing, well, can I use similar pieces or similar techniques? Put it in what I've done. And then our mocks are going to look very similar, sort of a nice sense of unity between all of them, you know? Small thing, but I think it goes a long way. I love too the use of some of those Visorak pincer pieces here for the claws at the edges of Bitil's fingers here, or hands, whatever you want to call them. I like the idea that the Visorak, of course, were a little bit sort of more bug beetle-like of sorts, and so using those pieces here as a part of the bug-like details on Bitil, because, you know, hey, if they looked bug-like before, they can look bug-like again on this Bitil mock here. But otherwise, yeah, like specifically on the torso and pretty much the whole leg design there, some great use of more sort of thin claw-like elements that do have this more menacing quality to them, but also do lean into some of the textures of a bug of some sort. So very fitting and a great way of capturing the look of Bitil. Next one now, this is by Grayson and it is called Krika. So Krika's always been a very unique and interesting character with some very unique coloured pieces. And I've always found those pieces very difficult to use, but I always think they just look fantastic when people do use them in some fashion. And of course, the best thing to use them on is a Krika revamp because, well, hey, it works. And so I love some of the stuff that Grayson's done here, specifically using some of the bone element pieces there on Krika's larger sort of front pincers. You know, Krika kind of does have this sort of more skeletal-like aesthetic to his design. It is still sort of slightly bug-like to some degree, but I also thought it was just this really kind of creepy, weird, you know, bone, evil sort of creature. So I think the inclusion of a few more kind of bone elements like that really helps to kind of keep the concept flowing in more unique and creative ways, and I really enjoyed that. Again, it's a subtle little detail, but I think it goes a long way. I also love the addition of this tail element here as well on Krika, because, I don't know, there's something about it that's just, again, very fitting for the kind of general concept of Krika, but wasn't there on the original set, but still does look super, super cool. So we take a look at the torso on Krika here, and it's using some of the slicer feet elements and just kind of layering them in a fashion that almost sort of looks a little bit kind of like a rib cage. And again, like I said, Krika does have that more sort of bone-like quality to him. So I like the idea of really subtly showing ways that he can be a little bit more skeletal in design, which, you know, it's not too obvious. It's not using bone pieces or using white elements or anything, but it does have a little bit more of a sort of, yeah, just slightly creepier vibe to it. Additionally, too, the use of some of the Stronius armor up top there on the shoulders, I think is also quite fitting because, again, that piece does have this more bone-like aesthetic to it. It's a little bit more sort of subtle, and I think just the way that those sort of spikes really kind of jut out, it's slightly reminiscent of bones of some sort. So I think that's another great kind of focus on using a specific textured element to fit with the overall texture of this mock. It's just really quite nice. Yeah, never forget to study the pieces in your collection and see which pieces might lend well with some of the other parts you're planning on using, whether they have very similar textures, very similar aesthetics, all that sort of stuff. It's just always important because you can really make all the different elements that you're including on the mock really tie together into one and just become this really beautiful, unified creation where all the different pieces are working in unison to help communicate one overall sort of concept, idea, aesthetic, all sorts of cool stuff like that. It just works, man. It works really well. So we'll move away now from the Makuta and the Toa, and we'll go into some of the titans of the Mistika Wave. And this is Takanuva, and Takanuva was built by Sergei Rekamenov. So I love this take on Takanuva here. Takanuva was easily one of my favorite sets within the Mistika Wave, and I just adored him. But I love how Sergei here has reimagined Takanuva to be a little bit more similar to some of the original versions of Takanuva, him having the Avoki mask there, him having a very similar color scheme to, well, even like the Stars Takanuva, but also still honoring the newer color scheme that was on Mistika Takanuva at the same time. So I think it's this beautiful blend of all the different versions of Takanuva that's all sort of just been unified into one just fantastic looking version. I love the choice of some of the armor pieces that he's used, specifically on the arms and the legs of this mock, using some of these sort of larger CCBS armor pieces that came on some of the Skull villains. They do have this sort of very kind of menacing look to them, but they also do kind of just look a little bit more like kind of Knight's armor. And I think that's perfect for Takanuva, because specifically what Takanuva was going through story-wise in the Mistika Wave was that he was this character that was dealing with both light and dark, and he was trying to, not be overcome by shadow and was trying to focus on the fact that he's a Tower of Light. All sorts of cool, edgy stuff. But I love that specific choice of that armor piece because I feel it does communicate that. There is a slight sinister quality to that, to the look of that armor, but it does also look a little bit more noble and fitting for Takanuva. So I think, again, really, really awesome way of using a specific Lego piece that's packed filled with meaning that ties back to the original story or idea of the set. I love, too, the staff that Takanuva has here, how one end is this sort of darker grayed weapon, and then the other end there is that beautiful sort of sparkling gold at the end of the spear. And I think that's fantastic because, again, it's capturing what I said before, Takanuva battling between the light and the dark, and that's reflected on his weapon. It's like half the lightsabers in Star Wars, where they can be packed filled with meaning that says so much about the character. It's like any good sword or weapon from any sort of form of storytelling. If you can pack that thing with meaning, then it's just becomes so much cooler. And this is a great example of that here as well. I love, too, the choice of using the Hero Factory Stormer feet pieces on Takanuva here, because if you study that piece, the back of it almost sort of does have little jets just sort of built into the piece. And so you can kind of see on the editing here that Mr. Buttloaf Builds there has added in that little bit of sort of jet flame like he's about to take off. So I think that's very fitting because, of course, there is the flight aesthetic behind every single one of these characters in this wave here. I think that's just a clever use of that piece because it does naturally have jets in it, and you can use that to your advantage here because, well, that's the aesthetic that that's just very key to the theme. And on top of all of that, just the general texture and look of that foot piece there just works with the rest of the smock very well. So I think it's just a very clever part use there, really, really leaning into the overall look, feel, and idea of Takanuva Mistika. Second last one now, this is Mazeka, and it's built by Sparkytron. So I've always enjoyed the Mazeka set. I never actually ended up getting it, but it's just definitely one of my favorite sets. I love the idea of this little itty-bitty Matoran on this massive sort of turret-like machine that just sort of explores the Kratanui swamps. Now, Dylan here has really taken the original idea and very heavily expanded upon it. The original set was a little bit more sort of spindly in areas, and Dylan's really taken the idea and sort of buffed it out, made it look a lot more kind of like some sort of military tank now. It almost looks like some sort of futuristic sci-fi creation just packed filled with protective armor and all sorts of crazy cool firing technology. The new sort of reimagined turret looks just beautiful. I love the addition of a lot of that trans green there, Could be that trans green is just some sort of powerful green energy that shoots laser bolts, or it could even just be that he's packed it filled with that Kratanui swamp water and found a way to weaponize it or something. I don't know. I think that's really cool. I love the idea, and the inclusion of some of those larger Hero Factory barrel pieces from the Invasion from Below wave is just awesome. I know there's this beautiful, almost sort of sci-fi look to this fantastic turret design now. It's great. I love, too, the specific choice of texture for this turret design, because we take a look at the bugs. They have this more sort of hairy, kind of creepy, spiky look to them, whereas a lot of the Toa have this more sort of mechanical, smooth look. So I love the beautiful contrast there, where one is this sort of spiky, menacing, feral almost sort of design, which is very in line with what you might associate a bad guy with, and then you see this more mechanical, smooth, agile looking aesthetic for the good guys. So very clear, distinct differences between the two. And I think they kind of almost align with the sort of personality traits that you might associate with the good guys or the bad guys. So it's great how much sort of meaning you can really pack into the textures that you use as well. So I think that's just perfect. Really well thought out and really effective design overall. So fantastic work there, Sparky. Let's now move on to Amok by Iggs, and this is Vultraz. So this is always a really fun little set here, this cute little Shadow Matoran with this big massive speeder. And I love how it's been reimagined here. The idea of using some of the Hero Factory bone elements for these sort of very posable controls that he has at the top of the speeder. And then also just the beautifully integrated Zamasphere launchers that have been put into the overall design of this speeder. I don't know, there's something that feels very much like a kind of classic Bionicle set in him doing that. You take a look at a lot of the different vehicle sets. They would very effectively pack in a lot of the different launchers into the overall design. And I don't know, I could easily see this passing as a Bionicle set. It might be a little bit more more of an expensive set than the original set for Vultraz was, but it's very in line with the sort of aesthetics that you might find on one of those older vehicle sets. You know, for example, he's using a lot of the sort of larger shield elements and a lot of those sort of larger fin pieces. You typically would find a whole bunch of those sorts of things on all of your larger scale vehicle sets. So hey, maybe you do want to do that. Maybe you want to build a cool little speeder like this for a mock that you've made, or you even want to go crazy and build a sort of larger form vehicle or ship or speeder for a larger character that you've made. Well, certainly one thing to be paying attention to and focusing on is doing stuff like this, using some of those larger fin pieces, larger kind of shield elements, any of those larger weapon pieces, larger kind of Technic lift arms, all that sort of stuff. That's kind of your bread and butter for this sort of thing. So definitely pay attention to some of those pieces. Use them if you've got them in your collection, if this is something you're looking towards building. I love, too, the addition of the green tubing pieces that sort of are the same kind of color as the Zamispheres that are being launched. Kind of gives this nice idea that there's sort of a larger kind of power source inside this speeder that's charging those cannons and shooting them out. Just a really, really nice look to it. So yeah, overall, that's been all the mocks in this Kratanui collab. This has been the Mistika wave. If you haven't checked out that Fantoka wave, that was the last episode there. So a whole bunch of just phenomenal stuff for this phenomenal Bionicle collab. Really, really just cool stuff, guys. So always a pleasure to cover a good old collab. I have actually been messaged by a few other people now who've been planning a collab or two. So hey, if you've got a collab coming up with some of your friends in the Bionicle community, shoot me a message. I'll be more than happy to do a little collaborative spotlight episode on it if that's something you're looking to do. Otherwise, if you want to feature some of your own mocks in the show, the submission email will be on your screen right now. It's also in the description below. You can send me your submissions through that email. Additionally, you can check all the links in the description to the mocks you saw today. Give those people a comment on their posts. Let them know what you think of the fantastic stuff they've made. And additionally, there's links to my social media in the description below as well. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next episode, which will be next Saturday. So see you then. Bye for now.